What's going on, everybody? It's Barmine from Barmine Tech. Today we're going to be talking about the HPE MicroServer ProLiant Gen11. And I do want to thank HPE for sending the server over for me to work with. I got to work with this server as a demo so we can make this video and get a better understanding of what this server is capable of. So again, I do want to thank HPE for sending this over for me to work with. This microserver is considered a small business server, and it gives you all the computing power a regular enterprise server would do in a small business package. And it's a very ideal server, like I said, for small businesses or that don't want all the extra parts of a large enterprise server, such as high power consumption, the high noise and heat that gets put off by these enterprise servers, and similar to that. The ProLiant MicroServer Gen11 is a small form factor. It's intended for small business use, so it's energy efficient. It has a low footprint. It's a microserver, and we'll take a look in a minute when I unbox it. But it has a small form factor, and it could sit away in a cabinet very nicely. I had it running for a little over a week right next to my computer. It's nothing like the normal servers that you would rack mount up noise-wise. It's very quiet, and you can comfortably sit next to it without any issues. One of my favorite features so far of this server is the ILO capability. If you're not familiar with ILO is, it's HPE's version of a pretty much iDRAC access to the server. So it's integrated lights out, and it's going to give you a console management of the HPE server at its bare bones level. So you're able to actually access the server underneath the operating system. You could get a full access to all the hardware and firmwares and anything you might need to change. And if needed, you can install an operating system straight from the ILO console and do much more. ILO is very beneficial in a business environment, being that you might not always be on site and need to manage the server. You can access it remotely and have full management of the server. We'll cover this more in a little bit, but these were just some of the key points I wanted to mention about this server. The first thing I want to do is head over to the webpage with the server description and some more information on it so we could talk about that. So that's what we're going to do right now. Over here, we're on HPE's site, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and we can get our first look at the ProLiant MicroServer Gen11. As you can see, it is a pretty small form factor server, and it's something that I really do like about this. And if I scroll down a little bit, we can get the quick specs for the server, as well as there is a couple different models, and we'll talk about that when we look at the spec sheet. Now, down here is where we start to get into more of the specs that I wanted to talk about. The server does support the Xeon 6300 series processors, so you can get up to 8 cores of processing power out of this server. It does support up to 128 gigabytes of memory. It comes with 16 or 32 gigabytes depending on the package that you purchase. It has the 2 PCIe expansion slots, the ILO 6, as I mentioned earlier. We have some TPM2 support. There, of course, is more information in this document that you could read through if you're interested, but I think we hit on the important topics of the processor, the memory, the storage, and the expansion capabilities. So this server, as I mentioned, was built with a small business use in mind. As you can see, the server is pretty small, and in a minute we're going to open it up and unbox it and you'll actually get a better look at it. But this is a very ideal form factor for a small business use. A small business might not have a full room dedicated towards their network equipment and servers, and they might just need to be able to tuck this under a shelf or in a cabinet somewhere. And this form factor would be very ideal for a small business shop trying to get some additional computing power with a nice new server. Of course, I'll have a link down below to this page, and I'll have a few more links with some more information about this server if you want to take a look at those to read about it. Now, personally, I do work in IT. I'm a network engineer, and we do deal with servers and, of course, other equipment all the time, but servers are a big one, and it's always a very high cost for our clients. If we take a look, this server comes in at $998 to start, of course in US dollars, and it does depend on the package that you choose. As I mentioned, we have a few different options as we can see from this page. The cost of servers is always something that's very high from what I can see. It's just how it works out when you need to refresh your hardware as an enterprise. A small business might not always have this option, and if you're running a small business, you might fall into this as well. This is where this HPE ProLiant MicroServer is going to really come into play. You get a lot of hardware power for a very fair price and an even better form factor. So personally, in my opinion and my experience, this would be something that I would recommend to a small business in need of a new server. So now that we talked about a brief overview of the server, we looked through the spec sheet and some more, let's go over to actually unboxing the server and just taking a look at it and seeing everything that it has. So to start off, we can take a look at the box. You can see we come with the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise packaging. Pretty standard for how you might receive a server or something similar. When we start to open the box up, you can start to see we get some foam packaging. Below that, we have our actual server box. To the side, we have some cables. These are going to be your power adapters. It's just a simple external power brick. Other than that, I'm going to pull this server out and we're going to take a look at it now. So now that we have the server unboxed, we can take our first look over at it. So if we start over here on the front end, we have some basic I/O. There's nothing too crazy. We just have a couple of USB ports in the front, and then we have our power button on the side. If we flip the server around and we look at the back side, we have our power where we would plug in our power adapter. Over here is where we're going to be putting in if we use any sort of expansion cards, like additional NICs, graphics cards, or anything similar to that. Next, we're going to have our console port. So if you want to make a serial connection to the server, you could do so. Down below the console port is going to be the ILO port. So that would be how we use the ILO feature to access the server. Next, we just have some video outputs. So there's DisplayPort and VGA. And then if we move over onto the right, we have 4 network interfaces, and we have 4 of those USB inputs as well. So you can see everything on the back end of the server. Additionally, one more over here on the side. This little plastic piece is actually meant to hold the power cable to prevent it from pulling out. So it would open up a little bit, and you would put your power cable into it and then plug it in, and it holds it in place so it doesn't get removed accidentally. Now that we talked about the I/O on the server, let's open the server up and take a look at the inside. And to do so, to start off, we're just going to remove these 2 thumb screws on the back. So I'm going to do that really quick. And then we're going to remove the front panel. So it does remove pretty easily. It pulls forward from the bottom of it, and then it will just kind of slide off. So there's kind of a little gap that you can get your finger into, and you can just kind of pull that up, and it will just come off the top. And then for the remainder of the case, it just kind of slides, and then you can just pull it up. You can set these to the side. The next thing we're going to need to do is these blue switches have a locked and unlocked feature, so we're going to need to move those into the unlocked feature to open up the case. And make sure you flip to the other side because there's going to be one on the other side as well. The next step we're going to need to be able to actually open this case up fully is we're going to need to talk about the front hard drive bays. So there are 4 hard drive bays for 3.5-inch drives on this server. They do have these nice quick release features, so you can see there's these blue switches, and you just kind of pull it through, and the hard drive is going to start to get removed. What is nice about HPE is that they don't use drive caddies. They use these little standoff screws, and they would just screw into the side of your hard drive so you can rack them up in the hard drive bay. We're going to set that to the side, and now that we're ready to pretty much open up this case the rest of the way, I'm going to kind of angle it a little bit so you can see, but there's going to be some star screws over here that we're going to need to remove. And if you ever get confused with the steps to open up the case, they do have it on the actual case itself. And then after we get the 2 screws over here, there's actually going to be 2 more, and they're going to be right over here on the side, and they're going to be the star bit style screws, so you should remove those as well. So if you ever get confused at which screws to remove, it has a little icon of a screw and points to the one that should be removed. So in total, you should be removing 4 screws to be able to open up the case fully. When you do it, as you can see I'm already doing it, the case just kind of flips open. If I spin it, we can see it a little bit better. As we saw before, we have our hard drive bay over here. If we move it into the middle, we have our CPU, our cooler, we have some expansion cards. I'll hold it up on a bit of an angle so you can see a little bit better. This is going to be for our ILO connection. We have a fan and heat sink. And if I flip it around, you can see over here on this end, we have our single stick of 32GB memory. Now the memory is expandable on this server, so you can upgrade it to a larger size if you'd like. As I mentioned, there is some expansion cards available, and to do so, I'm just gonna flip this closed for a minute. There's another thumb screw over the expansion ports, and you could just unscrew that, and it's kind of like a little trap door, and it flips open. And then from there, if I open it back up, we'd be able to insert something into one of our expansion ports. And you could pop the unneeded IO shield out, and you could seat whatever card you might be using in one of these extra slots and seat it right there and be done. It's a very nice, simple way to be able to use the expansion cards. And if not, you could just put it right back up and just use the thumb screw to screw it back in. But that's really, for the most part, everything inside the server. Taking a quick look, close it back up. I'm going to put the 4 screws back on, and then we're going to put the case back on. If you start off with putting the top 2 screws in first, it'll make it a little bit easier, make everything line up. And then we can come over, put it on the side, grab one of the other screws and put those back in over here on the side. Flip the chassis over, going to do the same thing over here. Now that we put all the screws back in, we can reinstall the top piece of the case, and then we can just seat that. It just kind of slides forward after it sits into position. And again, there's the 2 thumb screws on the back, and they should line up pretty nicely. And you can just put those thumb screws back in. Now, don't forget, before you put the front panel back on, don't forget to put your hard drive back in, and make sure you put it in the right way with the interfaces in the front. So I'm just going to slide my hard drive back in, and you'll just feel it click, and then that's all set. And the last step is to put the front panel back on, and it's just going to kind of angle and sit into a little channel, and then it's going to click on, and then you're all set. Now we'd be ready to start powering this on and get the initial config onto it. To get ready to do the first power on and get everything set up, like I was mentioning before, we do have an external power brick for this server. So what we can do is get it ready, and we can open up this little clip over here, and the power cable will actually sit in there, and then you can plug it in and just kind of wrap it up nicely. And if you clip it on, it'll actually prevent the plug from being pulled out. So it's a nice little touch on the back by HPE. Secondly, our other steps are going to be using the ILO port. So the ILO is what's going to give us the remote management of the server. It's going to make installing the operating system a lot easier. I would highly recommend getting a network cable in the ILO port, as well as one of the network interfaces as well, so you can get the server onto the network. Other than that, we're pretty much all set, and we're going to move over to configuring the server and talking about some more of its features. All right, so now that we went through that unboxing and we actually took apart the server, we looked at everything and we put it back together, let's actually get to setting it up. So I already cabled mine up and I powered it on, and now we're going to connect into the ILO and do our first setup. So after you get your server up and running, you're going to want to make sure that the ILO port is connected as well as a network port. On the server, there's going to be a tag on the bottom, and it's going to have your ILO administrator credentials. You're going to want to grab that, and then you're going to find your ILO address, whether you're going to use some sort of IP scanner or you're able to look in your router and find its address. So then you can just come over to the ILO portal. You can log in with administrator and whatever your password is that it says on the ILO sticker, and then you can log in with your ILO credentials. Now when you first get into the ILO overview, there's going to be a lot going on, and you're going to be able to get pretty much all the information that you need about your server. We can have a overview, and we can really sit here and we can click through all the tabs, but there is a lot of information available. We can have our system information. We can see about the firmware that we're running on the actual server. We can change options for our ILO and our network ports if we need. And we can do much more. The ILO is going to be a very capable portion of the server, and it's going to be very useful when it comes to managing it in the long term. Now, using ILO, I want to show how easy it is to actually manage the server and do the initial setup. So I'm just going to go quickly to show how easy it is to install an operating system. So in ILO, we have our power button over here, which we can turn on. And this will actually turn on our actual server outside of ILO. And then I can open up this console down here in the corner. And it's going to take a second to load up a little bit, but now you can see that our server is booting up. And it's just doing the initial setup check. This is very common for a server to do, and in a minute should boot up into our install media. Now, if you do want to set the boot order, and you can on a server, which is nice about having ILO, is you can come over to the administration tab and actually set the boot order over here. So if you're trying to boot to a USB drive or some sort of drive you're using to deploy operating systems, you could do it right over here instead of connecting a mouse and keyboard and trying to get into the boot menu. You could just do it through the ILO and make life much easier. I believe the server should be booting up, so we're going to get back into that and we're going to go through that process. And just as easy as that, you can see I was able to boot into the server and actually get into my OS deployment tool. So I'm just going to come down here and I want to select to install Proxmox. It's just a very simple hypervisor that would be ideal for a small business use. I'm going to go through the install pretty quickly, but I did want to just show the ease of deploying it. You can see I don't have any additional gear connected to the server. I'm doing all this straight through the console, through the iLoad management. This is really ideal because I don't need to set up all this additional equipment just to configure my new server. I'm going to run through this installer pretty quick because it's not really the main focus of this video. So I'm just going to do this really quickly and then we'll be right back. And now you can see that I'm already done with the install. I went through the whole setup menu and it's just processing the install. And it was just that easy to do through ILO. I didn't need to set up additional monitors. I didn't need to set up additional keyboards and a mouse. I was just able to do it all through my main computer I was already working off of. I really love this feature of the ILO because it makes setup so much easier. I'm going to let this finish setting up and then we're going to talk a little bit more about this server. Now I know I just showed off using the ILO a little bit for the deployment and I just want to talk about it a little bit more. So like I was saying earlier, it is a tool that's going to come on the server. It's going to give you remote management. Even if the server is off, it's going to be in a sleep state where you'll still be able to access the ILO. You can remotely manage the server, turn it on and off as you need. You could do firmware updates. You could do security updates. You could really make a lot of different changes through the ILO and you don't even need to be on site. As a small business, you might not have a dedicated IT team and the ILO portal is pretty simple to understand. It's very easy to access and once you understand the basics of it, working with it's going to be very easy to ensure your server stays up to date and fully operational. You can see through ILO we get different checks and ensuring that our server is all healthy. I can get a full summary of everything to ensure that all my hardware inside my server is healthy and working properly. I can check on my processor. I can check on all my memory and we can keep going and I can continue to get checks and ensure that everything's okay. I also can come through and I can update my firmware if I need to on my actual server and any of its components. And there's still so much more. We have security options. We have full management if we need to send out any sort of alerts. It can be done through ILO. As I was mentioning before, and we saw when I turned the power up in this top right corner, but we actually have a power section over here where we can simulate us pushing the actual power button on the server if we need to. We can come through here and we can change some of the power settings if we need to, and we can adjust the fans if needed. And there's just a lot of extra capabilities that ILO is going to give you, and on a small business server, this isn't something you would normally see, so it's a really nice feature to have on the server. So now that we've gone through how easy it is to set up an operating system on this server, whether it's another hypervisor software, or even if you just want to run this as a regular Microsoft server or a Linux server, you can see through the ILO connection, it's super simple, and it's a very easy setup. So now that we have a hypervisor, which I did as Proxmox, we can go over some of the additional capabilities that we could do with this. Again, this server does have the perfect amount of resources available for a small business, whether you need to be able to cover maybe hybrid workers or remote workers, or you need some internal systems for QuickBooks or your accounting software, or maybe you run cameras. All capable to be done with this server, as it's the perfect resource for this. So I'm just going to show some of the stuff that I built out quickly. So if you're not familiar, Proxmox is just another hypervisor option similar to ESXi or even Hyper-V from Microsoft. It's just a very popular option at this point. As I mentioned, this server does have the perfect amount of resources. It did come with a 4 terabyte hard drive, so after I built out the operating system, it left me with about 3.5 terabytes of hard drive space to use. It is expandable if you do need to add more storage, so if your small business does require more than 4 terabytes, that is possible. Like I said, there are 4 drive bays, which you can fill up fully to however much storage you might need. Like I said, I built out a couple of just small virtual machines just to kind of show some of the capabilities. As you can see right now, I have 3 different virtual machines running. I have a Windows server, I have a Linux server, a Windows 11 workstation running. So this could cover some of the basic stuff as a workstation for a remote worker, a Windows server to maybe do some of your internal patch management, or if you run QuickBooks, it could run on this server, and anything else that might be needed through there, maybe a CRM system. The Linux server could be any of your other systems that might need a Linux distro to run off of. and it's just an example that we could do. So I have 3 servers currently running, and you can see that we're barely touching the CPU usage, and even more, we're only using about 10 gigs of RAM currently with the operating system working. Like I did mention, the memory of this server is expandable to 128 gigabytes, so you do have plenty of room memory-wise to grow if you do need more virtual machines, and you need to leverage more memory for all of those. These are just some of the quick machines I built up over here in the top left corner. It doesn't mean that's what we're limited to. You can build out as many as you would like, of course, per what the server can handle. It is beefy, so you can probably cover anything that a small business might require. Maybe you want to run a DVR system for your security cameras and you want to save it directly to the server. With the expandable storage, with the 4 drive bays, that is very possible, and you can build out another virtual machine to run your NVR software and be able to save all your video footage straight to your server. I mentioned before about QuickBooks and maybe a CRM for internal ticketing. Maybe you have other devices that you want to do backups with, and you want to be able to run a backup software and have somewhere to save it to. Easy enough, I can build out a Veeam server if it's something you use, or any of the other popular backup softwares that are out there. I could just build another virtual machine here very easily and make a system to back up my other servers or machines in my office. I don't want to focus on the Proxmox aspect of stuff, but it does leave the possibilities to as much as you might need to grow through the server. It also has other capabilities through here, which with the additional network ports on this server, we can come and we could build out a virtual router, or even if we need to, depending on whatever system you might want to run, you might want to have some sort of security aspect, which with this server and the ILO and the Silicon of Trust, you can do all of that right through here and build out a secure firewall. You can build out a secure firewall to limit access to the systems. I don't have anything configured, but let's say in Proxmox, ESXi, or any of the other hypervisors, you can set up firewall rules to limit access in and out, and with the additional network ports, you can leverage those to ensure network uptime and the flow of traffic through the firewall. By covering some of the services and systems we're able to build out in Proxmox is just a quick demo of some of the stuff that you can do with this HPE ProLiant MicroServer Gen11. Like I said, it's a very capable server. It comes in a very nice small form factor, quite a bit of power inside of it, and it is upgradable if you do need additional resources like memory or storage. As a small business, it's really important to be able to trust your systems, and this HPE server is a perfect one to do so. It's going to be able to ensure operations stay up. You're going to have a powerful server that's going to be tucked away in a corner or maybe in a closet, or however you might have your networking set up, in a small form factor that's going to be energy efficient. It's going to help lower the operational costs. We're not having to power up these large enterprise-based servers that are going to generate a lot of heat and noise. This is a small server. I'm sitting right next to it and you can barely hear it's even running. It sips power versus some of these large tower servers or even rack mount servers that you might see very commonly. And like I said, the noise is great. I could sit next to the server and I wouldn't mind it all day. If you are interested in checking out one of these servers, I will have links to all the information down below, as well as a place where you can purchase one if you are interested. Again, I want to thank HPE for sending this over for me to work with and be able to show all of you all the capabilities of this server. As always, I want to thank you all for watching. I'll have links down below to all the information for the server, as well as all the gear in my home lab down below if you ever want to check any of it out. I'll have a link to our Discord server if you want to join in there. Again, I want to thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and as my buddy Dom would say, hack till it hurts.